Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim, the Bible Thumping Wingnut, and you're watching or listening to a broadcast that is happening on December 7th, 2014, originating on my YouTube channel and also being broadcast through my podcast feed through the Bible Thumping Wingnut podcast. And we've got a special evening tonight. Matt Dillahunty from the Atheist Experience is here, and Matt Slick from carm.org, and it's an honor to have such well-known, educated, and well thought of individuals from each side of the debate here. So I am excited about this evening, and I know people from both sides of the debate will be happy to watch this and to listen to this. So I look forward to what's about to occur. I wanted to say up front to all the viewers, thank you for watching, thank you for listening to this, and I wanted to give you the core of Christianity real quick. And that is that no matter who you are, no matter where you are on the spectrum of atheism, whether you're weak, whether you're strong, whether you're a former Christian, whether you used to be an atheist, now you just don't know, you're just searching, whoever you are, no matter what end of the spectrum you are on the whole thing, you can have peace with God, and that's through the Lord Jesus Christ. And we all know that we have done bad things, and those bad things are called sins, and there's a righteous judge who provided a way for us to be forgiven for our sins, and that's Jesus Christ, born of a virgin, lived the perfect life, was crucified, buried, and rose again for the remission of our sins. And when we repent of our sins, when we turn from them and ask Christ to forgive us of our sins, we can have peace with God. When we do that, we know that Christ paid the penalty for us on the cross so that we could be forgiven. And this has been the plan. This wasn't like plan B, plan C, or anything like that. This was the plan from the beginning, that Jesus Christ would be the crucified creator of all things, who is King of Kings and did all that he had planned, and it's all for his glory so that he would be lifted up. And those of us who know Christ as our personal Savior, we're no better than those who are strong atheists. It's only that for some reason God granted us faith and repentance, and we've been forgiven of our sins. So I hope you all respect that I need to share that with you, because Matt Slick and I, we don't do this to win arguments or to make people angry. We do this because this is what God's Word teaches. This is what we know is true, and this is what we want you to have as well. No matter where you are, we want you to have peace with God. We want you to know Christ as your Savior. So thanks for listening to that, and I really hope you'll consider it. So how did this gathering come about? Actually a couple weeks we had Aaron Raw on, and during that discussion, Matt Slick mentioned a few times the Dillahunty fallacy, and Matt watched at least part of that engagement and contacted me and asked if he could come on and talk to Matt Slick about what the Dillahunty fallacy is, and kind of hash it out what it is, and both Matts would like to explain what it is and from their perspective. So with that said, let me first off welcome you, Matt Dillahunty, to the show.
Thanks.
Good to have you. And then I'll let Matt Slick open up here and tell us from his perspective what his understanding is and why he used the term the Dillahunty fallacy. I guess wait a minute, let me back up a little bit more. In the past, Matt Slick called the Atheist Experience at least twice, and the second time Matt Slick called in, he talked to Matt Dillahunty, and it's all over the internet. People can watch that engagement. But towards the end, well, from that point, Matt Slick, I'll let you share.
Yeah. Well, before I jump right into that, I want to say that my last encounter with Aaron Raw, my only encounter with him, I got a little miffed at the guy, and I don't think I behaved in as a Christian a manner as I would profess, and I just want to let people know that I apologize for my part in that, and the like. He was quite difficult to work with, and I certainly will not give it that it was an intellectual challenge. It was just more of a procedural challenge. So just wanted to let you guys know. But yeah, what I remember, and I think I called, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, Matt D. And we were discussing the issue of logical absolutes and transcendentals. And the best of my recollection, what happened is that I was postulating that the laws of logic are either conceptual or, I believe, or material. And you said neither. And I said, what's the third option then? And you wouldn't provide any answer or any response to that. And I said several times, well, what is it? You say there's a third option, but yet you can't provide it. And hence, what I've done is said, well, that's a Dillahunty fallacy, is to say, yeah, there's an option. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I don't know what it is. And that's how I refute you. And so that's what it was. That's what it is in my recollection. Go ahead.
Cool. Well, so what happened was we were discussing logical absolutes, and you had presented that they were either physical or conceptual, and you presented physical conceptual as if it were a true dichotomy, and it's not. And when you asked me whether logical absolutes were physical or conceptual, I said neither, and that's the point at which you began to shift the burden of proof. You see, for a true dichotomy, you need two directly opposed ideas. So like a lot of people would think that true and false represent a true dichotomy, but they don't. The true dichotomy is true and not true, false and not false. You need a direct logical negation. True and false is only a dichotomy with regard to truth statements whose truth value can be evaluated with respect to either true or false. But a true dichotomy, a proper dichotomy, is true and not true. And likewise, a proper dichotomy would be physical and not physical, or conceptual and not conceptual. But as soon as you insert that physical and conceptual is in fact a true dichotomy, a proper dichotomy, the burden of proof is on you to represent that. And when you asked me which one the logical absolutes fell into, my answer was neither, at which you mocked and scoffed and were laughing at the fact that I didn't have a label. Now it turns out that there was at least one appropriate label right in the name of the argument, transcendent. It's the transcendental argument for the existence of God. Transcendent could have been a label that would work. But what I found really funny is that my entire point was just that you had presented something as if it were a true dichotomy without demonstrating that it was. And then in order to avoid demonstrating that, you shifted the burden of proof onto me to say, what's the third option? And the fact that I didn't have a label for a third option is irrelevant to the fact that we had described this category, and irrelevant to the fact that physical conceptual is not a proper dichotomy. And then what was particularly amusing about this is that I'll apologize, I don't listen to your show, but people who do listen to it have mentioned over the years that a handful of times you've mentioned this Dillahunty fallacy of asserting a third option without labeling or without demonstrating it. I don't exactly know how you phrase it, but you had asked whether the logical absolutes were physical or conceptual, and I said neither, and that was an unsatisfactory answer. Meanwhile, when asked whether God was physical or conceptual, your answer was reportedly neither. And so not only did I not commit a fallacy, I just objected to a false dilemma, and it's not on me to tell you what all the other options are, because we may not know what the other options are. And then ironically, you agreed with me by giving the same answer that you previously mocked. So maybe we should have the not-so-slick fallacy, where you present as reasonable the same position that you've just mocked as unreasonable.
Sounds good to me. Have a not-so-slick fallacy. That'd be great. I don't recall ever saying it was a true dichotomy. And what you're talking about in a true dichotomy is what's called an antonymic pair. Antonyms are opposites, the thing and the negation of the thing. And I would agree with you that we have the horse or not the horse. We have God, we have not God. Those are true dichotomies. There can be no third option by definition in those things. So we have two worldviews we're working from, atheism or theism, or I would only defend Christian theism, of course. So I don't recall saying it was only that. I was actually hoping that you would say a third option would possibly would be spiritual. Well, then that would have been a more interesting debate and discussion. But I was hoping that you would opt in with a third option. You didn't do it. And that was my complaint.
How is that a fallacy?
Oh, The fallacy, what I say is yeah, there's a third option, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
No. I'm saying that what you presented me was not a true dichotomy, and
I didn't say it was.
Your response is to ask, well, then what is the third option, in order to avoid demonstrating that those are the only two.
Do you recall me saying it was a true dichotomy?
You said everything is either physical or conceptual. That's a presentation of a true dichotomy.
If I said that, then I would be mistaken for having said that.
Cool.
If that's what I said.
They can go back and I believe it was written on the tag formulation at carm.org. It was your entire point to try to demonstrate that it was therefore conceptual, and then to tie that concept to God.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I'm not doubting. I'm not calling you any names or anything like that. Maybe both of us are not remembering correctly, but I don't think I would ever say that it can only be those things, or was a true dichotomy to say this or that. I mean, there are other options besides the physical and the conceptual. I would say that there's the very nature of spiritual itself. I believe in at least 3 options like that in a metaphysical sense. So you know, we'd have to go back and maybe watch it and see exactly how it went. But you know how it is. Sometimes you're saying things, and you're just on the fly, and you're going, and you're going to say things, and later on you'll say, well, I'd say it differently. You've said that before in some of your discussions, that you've changed your positions, you've altered, you've modified, and things like that. But nevertheless, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I didn't believe
how it's a fallacy. I mean, for 4 years or so, you've been naming this fallacy, and it seems that if I present 2 options and you say that the thing we're trying to classify doesn't fit either one, then you have some obligation to present a third category that it actually should be fit under. That's not actually the case. If your position is that the thing we're trying to classify must fit under one of these 2, that's something you need to demonstrate.
Well, actually, in an attempt to refute my argument, where I said that the laws of logic were either conceptual or they're physical, and you propose that that's not the case. I proposed 2 options. I don't recall ever saying that those are the only 2. If I did, then I misspoke. I don't believe I would have said that, but nevertheless, they weren't the only 2 options possible, because I do believe that there's a spiritual consequence in transcendence as an emanation of God. I did propose 2 options, and you negated that. Well, if you're going to negate the 2 options, then what's the third? That would be my question. If you're going to say, no, there's a third option, then what is it? I believe you did say there was a third option, didn't you?
No, I said that there could be a third option, that there may be more. I'm saying that if you give me 2 options and I say that it doesn't fit under either one, and your response is, what's the third one, you're then looking for a label. And the label is irrelevant. We've already established what the third category is as a descriptor. And the third category would be that it is not physical and not conceptual. It doesn't matter what label we put on it.
All right, so in a debate, if we debate in the future, and you opt to say that there's another option, but you don't provide it, is that going to be an acceptable procedure for you? If it is for you, then it'll be for me too. If you're to say, well, Matt, what about this? I say, I don't know the other option. I don't know. Not a problem. We just continue on because it's perfectly valid.
Well, the thing here is that if you're stating that it has to be one of these 2 things, then it's not even up to me to say that there is a third option, or that we recognize a third option. It's up to you to demonstrate that it has to be one of those 2 things. The failure of somebody to give a third option doesn't mean there isn't one, and it doesn't mean that there's a fallacy. Well, you're essentially constructing a dichotomy on the fly and asserting that this is the case, and saying, if you can't come up with some other explanation, I'm sticking with the one I've got, which is an argument from ignorance fallacy.
Well, it's an argument of provision. If I have options to work from and you don't, and you can't provide anything, if I have an argument to work from, and I have 2 options that I've provided, and you don't like either one, and you just don't want to admit or say that, yes, there is a third option, and here's what it is, so that we can at least tackle it, then you're arguing out of agnosticism. You're saying, here, look, I don't know what the third option would be. I'm not sure what it would be, but it's got to be out there because your options can't work. Your options aren't logically required as being the only 2 possible options. Okay, fine. Then what is the third option? And that was my whole question. What is the third option? And you didn't provide it.
You're right back to engaging in a shifting of the burden of proof and an argument from ignorance. You're saying that this has to be physical or conceptual, and you're not demonstrating why, or the fact that it does have to be one of those 2. And in fact, you don't even believe that those are the only 2 options. And then you're saying that you have met this burden of proof, or implying that you've met the burden of proof, until somebody proves you wrong. And then now it's up to everybody else to come up with whatever the category is or the label is to demonstrate that you're wrong. That's not the way this works. If you're the one making the claim, you have the burden of proof.
Well, it's not a shifting of burden of proof if you're the one saying there could be a third option.
When I say that it doesn't fall into either of the two that you've presented, and you haven't made the case for that, then by definition, there must be some other option, which, by the way, you've already agreed with me that there are other options, correct?
Well, you didn't provide those then, and that was the...
It doesn't matter what I provide. That's like lightning bolts come from Thor until somebody provides some other explanation. That's simply not the case. It's another fallacy. It's the argument from ignorance that X is justified and true until it's been proved false.
But
it doesn't matter what
you're talking the argument from ignorance. You're saying there's a third option, you weren't able to provide it.
Wow. Do you really not understand the argument from ignorance fallacy?
Yeah. What I understand that you're doing is you're trying to shift this whole thing back onto me.
Because it is. You're the one who made the...
In our discussion, I was presenting the issue, the logical absolutes are conceptual by nature because they're abstractions. They are conceptual by nature. They are abstractions. Now, we can either have a physical thing or we can have a conceptual option. This is what I was bringing up. Now, you said, no, it doesn't necessitate. There's only those two. Okay, great. If what you want to say is true, and you're the one now making the statement, then I'm just asking you to demonstrate that your statement has validity. Show it to me.
My statement does have validity, which I've already shown and you've already agreed to, that it doesn't have to be just those two. My statement is you have presented these as the only two options and have not demonstrated that it is necessarily only these two options. And in fact, you agree with me that there are other options.
Well, I would say that they're conceptual. But
I'm talking about the options for categorizing, that there are others besides physical and conceptual. You've already agreed to that.
Yeah, and all kinds of things, sure. Yeah, but I'm just saying that in the context of what we were talking about, you're the one who said that it wasn't a necessary dichotomy, and you're the one who said that it could be a third option. And then I responded, well, then what is it? And that's when you didn't provide an answer. That's Correct. What I'm talking about. Is what I call the Dillahunty fallacy. Sure, here's an option. There's an option. Yes, there's an ability. There's something else, but you know what? I don't have to know what it is.
That may be the case. If you have 8 buckets with which you can label things, let's put this in this bucket and this in this bucket, and there may be other buckets that we don't know of. There may be other categories that we haven't defined or labeled yet, and you say that something is either physical or conceptual, and I say those aren't the only options. It doesn't matter whether I can present you any other options. We may not have labeled and properly categorized into the other options. I'm objecting to the fact that you are picking two things that are not a true dichotomy and portraying them as if they were.
Well, I didn't intend to portray them if they're the only dichotomy, or the only two options. I believe that there's something else that you could have said, and I was hoping you were going to say that. And I was hoping that you would step into that, but you didn't do it.
I'm sorry that I don't fall into your script, but it doesn't change the fact that I didn't actually commit a fallacy. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind that you run around, with the Dillahunty fallacy or whatever else, because every time you say it, it's kind of publicity for me, and it gives me an opportunity to show that there was no fallacy committed. I'm still waiting for a demonstration that I committed any fallacy at all.
Well, I think the best thing to do is just kind of move on, because we're not going to agree at this point. Like I said, I offered 2 possibilities. You negated both. You neglected to be able to provide a third, and that's what I wanted you to do. And then that's how you refuted it, by saying there's a third, but you're not going to tell me what it is. That's what I'm referring to as a fallacy.
Something is red. If you said that something is either red or blue, and those are the 2 options, and you have a definition for red, and the thing we're trying to categorize doesn't fit red, and you have a definition for blue, and the thing we're trying to categorize doesn't fit blue, then it's fine to say that what we're trying to categorize doesn't fit either red or blue. And then you say, what's the other option? I don't know. Because maybe we haven't defined yellow or green or pink or whatever it might be. It's not a fallacy on my part, and it's not a problem with my position at all to not have a label for something which clearly does not fit into the 2 categories that you've presented.
So then what are the conceptual things called logical absolutes? What are these logical absolutes by nature? What's their ontos?
I don't know that they are things by nature. I don't know that I have a specific category from them, but that's secondary to whether or not there was a fallacy.
Well,
I mean, you've been, for 4 or 5 years now, you've been trumpeting around and mocking and sneering about the Dillahunty fallacy, and now I'm asking you to demonstrate that there was any such fallacy, and you're just like, well, we're not going to agree on that, so let's move on.
Well, we aren't going to agree on it. I'm saying that in our discussion, this is the problem, in our discussion, you're saying that these 2 options aren't the only ones that are available. Okay, great. Then show me the other one. You weren't able to do that.
Thank you. That's like the 5th time you've gone to the argument from ignorance and the shift burden of proof again. It's the not-so-slick fallacy.
Okay, great. You're the one who said, I recall, you're the one who said there could be a third option. Great. You're the one who said it. I played off of what you said, so you show it to me. You tell me what it is. You didn't. That was the problem.
Not a fallacy.
Okay, let's not call it a fallacy. We'll call it the, what do you want to call it? How about this? The Dillahunty dodge. How's that?
How about the slick confusion? Because just because you assert that something is the case and I can't give you a label for what you actually agree with me on, doesn't mean that I've done anything wrong or irrational. You're the one who is asserting that these things must be one of these two options, and if I say no, then you're like, well, what are the other options? That is by definition the argument from ignorance fallacy.
Okay, well, why don't we move on and see what these things are? Let's run through this discussion and see if we can figure it out.
I don't have an answer.
You don't have an answer.
I don't have an answer for what you want to label them or call them.
Well, is logic a process of the mind?
And so I'm not going to get into this where we're confusing the map for the place. Plus, as I had said, 4 years ago or so, after the discussion that we had was over, you were on for about 45 minutes, and then you evidently went on your radio show to claim victory, which I don't know what the hell that means. But the one objection that I launched to the written form at the CARM site, after claiming there was nothing wrong with it, you went and edited it and changed it. And so I had said that I would be happy for you to call back in or to have other discussions about other things, but that I was not going to go through tag with you again at all.
Okay, I don't remember that, but okay, great. But is logic a process of the mind?
Well, it depends on what you mean by logic. If you're talking about our reasoning, our ability to reason, then yes, it's a product of the mind. But now we're talking about thinking, kind of cognition, and not necessarily reason itself.
So reasoning is a process of the mind, right?
Yes, reasoning is something we do.
Okay, good. So reasoning has a definite relationship to the mind.
Yes.
Okay. And logic and reasoning, synonymous. Logic has a... They're not?
No, reasoning and logic are not synonymous.
Okay, tell me how they're not synonymous.
Well, logic has a number of different uses that don't necessarily require... that aren't synonymous with reasoning. Reasoning is my ability to think, and it's separate from the foundations of reason, like the logical absolutes that we had talked about before.
Okay, but great. We'll go with that.
Okay.
Let's go with that. So these foundations of reason, the laws of logic,
yeah.
Right? So these laws of logic, are the laws themselves conceptual?
We can conceive them. They are concepts that we hold.
So the laws of logic are concepts?
No. That's not what I'm saying. The fact that we can conceive something doesn't make that something a concept. That's confusing the map for the place. I can have a concept of a rock, and that's separate from a rock.
Is your concept of the mind, is it an abstraction?
Is my concept of the mind an abstraction? I don't know what you mean.
Is your concept an abstraction? I don't want to be tautologous. Your concept, by definition, deals with the mind. Laws are codifications of behavior of various things that we have, and by nature, all laws are conceptual.
Well, first of all, there's a problem with using the word laws, but we could probably dicker about every single word that we're going to use tonight, because the foundations of thought, the laws of logic, the identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, which, by the way, you should spend more time on excluded middle, because that's kind of what you're doing with the Dillahunty fallacy. These things are not things. They're not extant entities that exist in reality. They are the... we have constructed descriptions of things that are truths, that appear to be true. Now, when it comes to reason and reality, these are things that we have to presuppose. We cannot demonstrate the truth of, we cannot verify reason with reason. This is the problem of induction, etc. And so we presuppose that reality is real, that our perception and experience of it is accurate, and that reason is reasonable. But to say, what are these things? I have these concepts in my brain. I understand them, but they are not merely a product of my brain or anybody else's brain. They are things that we recognized about reality. They're not physical things. They're not merely conceptual things. Because if every mind ceased to exist, then the truths that we've recognized of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, the ones we've presupposed, would still seem to be true. Now, we can't demonstrate that because we can't get rid of all the minds, but they would still seem to be true, and that means that they're not necessarily contingent on any individual mind. And the idea that they would be seems absurd and seems contrary to what they would tell us.
A lot of stuff to tackle there. Do you experience the laws of logic?
I don't know what you mean by experience. I mean, on some level, everything is experience.
Well, you experience heat, and you experience love, and you experience annoyance, and pain, and various things. And experience requires time. So, but you experience things. We have to be careful of not. Well, we'll get into that. When you experience something, the individual experience is subjective, but the universality of anything, like a law, cannot be experienced. You can only experience particulars, not universals, in this sense of the laws, the particular instances of the universals. Would you agree with that?
I don't know, and part of this goes back to this thing about laws and universals, because what I've just finished explaining is that we presuppose that identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are true, but that's a matter of practicality. There's no way to actually demonstrate this. It's the problem of proving reason with reason.
So then you're an atheistic presuppositionalist.
Yes.
I'm glad you admitted that, because I've listened.
You're glad I admitted it. I admitted it during the debate with Cy at the beginning.
Well,
it is the basic common position among modern philosophers is that we haven't solved the problem of hard solipsism. We may not be able to. We haven't solved the problem of induction. We may not be able to, and that we must, if we're honest, acknowledge that we are presupposing the foundations of reason, that reality is real, and that our experience of reality is accurate. Now, that's at one level of conversation. Within the bounds of that framework, within the bounds of the reality that I experience, where I've already acknowledged that I'm going to presuppose the laws of logic and these other things, then, and this is why, and it's probably not a particularly useful term. I'm still talking to some other people about it. This is why I talked about maximal certainty as opposed to absolute certainty. Because much like in a computer game, whatever the rules of the computer game are, something is true with respect to those rules. So if I've got a helmet that gives me +5 to fire damage, it doesn't matter that that's a fictional world. Within the confines of that world, it's true that that helmet gives me +5 to fire damage or whatever. And so within the context or within the framework of the reality they experience, having presupposed these things, we can still make determinations about what's true and what's not. And it's not in an absolute sense. It's in this internal context.
Well, I appreciate your idea that maximal certainty versus absolute certainty. I think there's some level of truth in that idea. It's kind of a scientism. But you admit certain presuppositions, and that's not a negation. It's not a chop. It's not a dig. It's just we all have to do that, necessarily so. The question, though, the transcendental argument for God's existence, is kind of picking this up from 5 years ago, deals with the issue, the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. We only have two options to work from. Now, we do have a true dichotomy here. What's that?
I was going to say, are you sure?
I was going to say the true dichotomy would be God and not God as worldviews. Would you agree that's a true dichotomy?
Sure. God and not God, direct logical negations.
All right, good. And so since we only have two options to work from, a disjunctive syllogism would require that if one of them is negated, the other one is validated.
Yes.
Okay. And so since we only have two options to work from, if one of them cannot account for a certain phenomena, then the other one would be validated, theoretically, maximally speaking.
Well, if one position could not account for something, that doesn't mean that it actually can't be accounted for under that one. And one of the reasons, I saw, one of the points where you tried to raise the Dillahunty fallacy against Aaron was in response to this exact question, pretty much, where you'd said that we either have God or not God as an explanation. And Aaron jumped in and, you know, spoke too quickly, but what he was actually saying, if you go back and listen to it, was that he objected to the idea that God serves as any sort of explanation at all. That he's basically agreeing with me that the God concept has no explanatory power. We tend to explain things in terms of other things we understand, and God, as a bigger mystery, is just an attempt to solve a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery. So if you look at the worldviews that don't include a God, the fact that they have not been able to account for, let's say, the laws of logic, does not mean that it is impossible that they could account for the laws of logic. And it doesn't mean that the God option does. It could be the case that there simply is no account for these things, and we've categorized them wrong, that there doesn't need to be an explanation for why they are the way they are. In which case, then the God explanation would not work, because if you're claiming that you know why the logical absolutes are true, then that's something that needs to be demonstrated. If you're claiming that you have no idea why, and that we may not ever know why, and that there may in fact not be a why, this might not be a why question, then the not God answer would actually qualify.
I'm just curious about something. We'll get back into this. Are you a materialist, a naturalist, or what?
Well, once again, you're wanting to put labels on stuff. Well, those labels are used in a bunch of different ways. In general, so there's a difference between philosophical naturalism, materialism, and methodological naturalism, materialism. Yeah. Philosophical naturalism is the assertion that the natural world is in fact all that exists.
Right.
And that is something that I think is, as long as you're not requiring absolute certainty, if you're just stating that based on the available information, this is the most reasonable conclusion, I might be okay with that. But generally I identify as a methodological naturalist, that we seem to be currently, and perhaps forever, blocked from confirming supernatural causation. We have no mechanisms to test such a causal link, and therefore we continue to seek out explanations in terms of natural explanations. And the fact that we don't have an explanation does not mean that a supernatural one suddenly becomes plausible.
Okay. So you're more of a naturalist?
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you're a naturalist.
I'm not presupposing the non-existence of the supernatural. I'm acknowledging the problem of demonstrating a causal link to the supernatural, that the supernatural hasn't been confirmed or presented, and no mechanism has been demonstrated with which one could do that.
Problem of demonstrating a causal link of what was that again?
The problem of demonstrating a causal link to supernatural causes.
Interesting. Boy, there's so many things I'd like to talk to you about. All right, so the tag back up. I wanted to find out where you're at, because I like to cater answers, responses, to individual atheists, because there are different forms and varieties of atheism.
I said I wasn't going to talk to tag, but of course we still are. But that's okay.
Because the power. See, you said that the God explanation has no explanatory power. So then, by definition, then by definition, the atheistic perspective has to have all of the explanatory power.
No, because you're assuming that something can necessarily be explained. It may be the case that there is no explanation.
Well, I don't agree that there aren't any explanations for things, but we're talking about the laws of logic. These various laws that you use and that I use, we both presuppose as being valid. My worldview, I can account for them. And your worldview, you can't provide any intellectual justification for their universality and their truth values.
See, that's why I said I presuppose them. You claim that you can give an account for them, and so do all the presuppositionalists I've engaged with, and yet they never actually give an account for them. And moreover, I don't know if you actually identify as a presuppositionalist. Somebody has said you don't, and yet you're going with tag and
I do.
Claiming. Okay, I'm with you there. We're like bros on the do and don't on various things. But the thing is, the presuppositionalists are claiming that they have solved the problem of hard solve system, the problem of induction, and can give an account for the logical absolutes. And they are also claiming that no other worldview can. Now, most philosophers are acknowledging agreement with the no other worldview can, or in saying that nobody has given an account of these things. And yet the precepts claim that they can. And yet they fail to meet either that, which in order to demonstrate, they'd have to demonstrate that they can give an account and that nobody else can. I don't know how they could demonstrate for certain or to a reasonable certainty that nobody else can.
Well, I wouldn't argue that no one else can right now. I would just say that I'm only going to argue the Christian worldview, because that's the only one I'm going to argue. And I believe all other worldviews are inconsistent ultimately, but that's another topic.
But see, if you say that the Christian worldview can account for these things, first of all, it's kind of an empty proposition, because you could assume some hypothetical explanation that would be sufficient to explain it, assuming that we can determine what would be sufficient to explain it, but you haven't demonstrated that it's necessary. It's like saying that I don't know what caused my bank account to go from $1,000 to $100 overnight, but I do have a worldview that could account for it, and that worldview is that money pixies snuck in and removed it all. Now that is clearly a sufficient account, but it's not a necessary account, and there's been no demonstration that's true. So claiming that Christianity can give an account for something is really a kind of a vapid concept. It's like saying, hey, we don't know why the universe exists, but I have a worldview that includes a God who is capable of making a universe, and so my worldview has given an account of this, which doesn't matter until you actually demonstrate that your worldview is true.
Well, we should believe things that have explanatory power to a certain degree. Granted, money pixies, neither you nor I would agree that they exist, even though sometimes I will wonder if they do or do not, considering my bank account problems. But nevertheless, if we're going to have something that we're going to be proposing, God or not God, then we should be able to argue from within those perspectives, either one. I can defend the God position, you can defend the no God position. You're at a disadvantage because you have to demonstrate a negative.
No, see, I'm not asserting. See, this is another thing. The position seems to be that atheism is the assertion that gods don't exist, and therefore when a theist and an atheist are in discussion, the theist is trying to prove God exists and the atheist is trying to prove God doesn't exist. And that is a problem. We don't try to address two prongs of a claim at the same time. That would be like going into court and saying the prosecution needs to demonstrate guilt and the defense needs to demonstrate innocence. The burden of proof is on those who are claiming that a God actually exists. My position is not necessarily God doesn't exist. It's I do not believe that a God exists. You have not met your burden of proof.
The problem with that is it's subjective, because what is proof to one person is proof to another person. See, I could give you the best proof in the universe, and then you could say, I'm not going to accuse you of idiocy because I don't believe you're an idiot at all, but you could just say, hey, look, I just reject that proof. Why? Because I reject the proof. Why? Because it's me.
Yeah,
and so subjectivity, I am correct, and subjectivity
and I would
means
love it if somebody would actually give me the best proof in the universe. Unfortunately, what we get is nothing at all like that.
Well, you have stated that you do not believe it's reasonable to believe that God exists. I would say that I don't believe it's reasonable to deny that God exists. See, the problem here is that we can both have the same arguments presented to us, but because of our our presuppositions and the worldviews from which we operate, then we're going to judge whether or not the evidence is sufficient or not. We come back to subjectivity, and that's a problem, because how are we going to, whose subjectivity is better? My subjectivity can beat up yours, or what? We're at an impasse at this point. We have to have something else.
Except that when we take a look at the presuppositions we're making, I presuppose the logical absolutes and reality, and that my perception of reality is accurate. And you presuppose all of those things, only you wouldn't say that you presuppose them. You presuppose that you have an account for all those things. That's a violation of Occam's razor. You've multiplied entities unnecessarily. I don't have an account for them. I'm not aware that anybody does, and you're claiming that you do. And so you have this. We should minimize not only the number of assumptions and presuppositions we make, but also the depth, and you have gone a layer deeper.
Yes. That's often the case when I have this discussion with atheists. See, I can justify my assumptions. I can provide the necessary intellectual preconditions that can provide for the universality of the laws of logic. for absolute morals, our own existence. Where if an
How do you
atheist is respected, you can't do that.
How do you justify reason without appealing to reason?
I appeal to God's existence as a necessary precondition for reason. Think about this. The laws of logic are conceptual absolutes that are transcendent. They're invariant. They are of the mind. It's perfectly logical to say that we have, if we're going to have something that is universal and abstract, and abstraction deals with the mind, then behind them is a universal mind. It's perfectly logical to infer that.
Actually, it's not remotely, because what you just said is the logical absolutes are conceptual absolutes that are transcendent. You haven't demonstrated any of those. You have assumed those in order to justify the explanation you have for them. You are in the same problem of induction, of representing reason. So it does you no good to say, okay, we have these foundational things of reason, and it doesn't appear that anybody else can give an account for them. But I'm going to say that they're absolute, which is not even actually my presupposition. You can't demonstrate that absolute. And then I'm going to invent a mind that is absolute in order to use it as an explanation for these things. And even if the model that you're suggesting turned out to be correct, you have no rational foundation to do so without presupposing the reliability of reason. Because you're trying to prove that you have a reasonable foundation for reason, and you're using reason to do that.
Yes, I am using reason. We both agree that we have to have assumptions. We're going to begin with something. We do not learn that we're humans every single day. We don't prove that we're the same person we were a week ago. We don't have to establish what the nature of human essence is in order to know that we're humans. We all have certain assumptions. That's not the issue. The issue is what worldview best accounts for the regularity of our existence and for the universality of these laws. If you're going to say that the laws of logic, absolutely yes. If you're going to say the laws of logic are not regular, then I might as well just say, well, blue sleeps faster than Wednesday. Do you know of any place when the laws of logic are not true? Of course they're true. You yourself said they're not dependent upon any single mind, and then you're referring to human minds, which means that their existence, that the minds that would appeal to them have to appeal to something outside of themselves. Some conceptual abstractions, something that's out there, something that they're coming in contact with, some way, somehow, that is not dependent upon the physical realm for their existence. They're coming in contact with it in this conceptual realm.
Well, first of all, we may have a problem with the idea of conceptual realm, but what you said was that what's important is that you have a worldview that explains these things. Now, I think what's important is that the worldview that is purported to explain them is actually true, because anybody could invent something that is sufficient but not necessary, as I talked about earlier. You can give an account and say Christianity serves as an account for the logical absolutes. Christianity serves as an account for the origin of the universe, but you haven't demonstrated that your explanation is necessary. And you have to have both prongs, necessary and sufficient, to demonstrate this causal link.
Necessary and sufficient causation deals with the physical realm. We're talking about conceptual things, not necessary and sufficient conditions in a conceptual thing of a logical proof.
That it doesn't apply, that causality doesn't apply to the conceptual realm as well.
Well, we have certain thoughts that those are caused by certain stimulus. Now, in your naturalistic realm, you're the one who's got a problem in that. We haven't even got into that issue here, deterministic lack of freedom. What I'm talking about here, through this issue of the transcendentals, that I would say that God is behind them, that God is the necessary precondition, that God is the transcendent mind, that pervades transcendently the entire universe. And we, being made in His image, can think His thoughts after Him. Now, you may not like that, and you may not agree with it, but at least I have an explanation from a Christian worldview. As an atheist, you don't have any way to account for the universality of the laws of logic.
Correct, and I don't think you do either. People in ancient times had an explanation for lightning, and they were wrong.
Well, I just gave you one. Show me that my demonstration or my logic is wrong.
Argument from ignorance. X is true until it's proven to be false. That is not the way we go about establishing the truth of things. You don't get just because anybody who believed that Thor was throwing lightning bolts, could have said the same thing. Oh, you say that there's no good reason to believe this? Prove me wrong. Well, no, your job as the person who is asserting a position and an explanation is to demonstrate this. And if instead you say, prove me wrong, you are engaged in the argument from ignorance fallacy.
That's the whole point. The disjunctive syllogism, which you agreed to at the beginning, the atheistic worldview cannot do it at all. It cannot account for the universality of the laws of logic.
Prove it. Prove that there is no atheistic explanation for the laws of logic.
I can't, because everyone that I've ever had from an atheist hasn't worked.
Oh, okay. So every swan I've ever met is white. How many fallacies are you going to throw in one big gulp?
I tell you what, falsify my statement. Tell me from your atheistic perspective how you can account for them. Tell me how you can.
Proof. You asserted that it's impossible for the atheistic view to do this. That is your claim. Prove it.
All right. Let's try this. If there's no God, then that which is in the universe must be naturalistically based. It must operate out of the laws of physics and/or energy and everything else that's a property of the universe, right?
Not necessarily.
No? So there's something else besides the universe out there?
I don't know.
Okay, so you argue that you don't know things, you don't know what's out there, you don't know if God's there, you don't know what's beyond the universe, you don't know anything about anything, and that's how you're going to defend your position?
Well, actually, you're the one in the position for defending, and it's not a matter of me not knowing anything about anything. The one thing I do know something about is reasoning and avoiding fallacies, which you just did like a parade of 18 of them.
Well, tell you what, you like the idea of science, and I've listened to you before. You talk about how things need to be validated, and you assume the validity of science, you assume the validity of rationalism, and you assume the validity and the consistency of nature. So you assume a certain naturalistic principle, and that that the scientific method is a valid way of learning of our physical realm. Is that not true?
These are, so I told you what my presuppositions were, and in much the same way, if you presuppose the laws of logic, that leads to mathematics and mathematic validity. You don't have to assume that mathematics is valid. Mathematics is valid within the context based on that initial presupposition. And the same is true for scientific methods, where you are examining evidence to produce, first of all, science doesn't lead people to truth. Science produces models and theories that are probabilistic, that are the best current explanations for the facts that we have, and they are predicated on this presupposition of the laws of reason. Now, if you want to spill that down to say because you presuppose this and everything that's derived from it is also a presupposition, I think you're kind of playing with words at that point. And that's why in the debate with Sai, I pointed out that if the laws of logic are maximal certainty, then there is reasonable certainty for the things which are derived from them. There's a difference we recognize between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning.
The laws of logic are certainly not properties of the physical universe. Would you agree?
Yes, in the sense that if there were no universe, if there was nothing, then everything that I understand about the logical absolutes would remain.
So then the logical absolutes are independent of the physical universe?
Yes.
Okay. So they're not physical in their basis, they're not materialistically based, they're not properties of the physical realm?
No.
That's not correct, or it is correct?
As far as I can tell, that's correct, that they are not contingent upon the material world.
So then the logical absolutes would have existence if the universe didn't exist and we people in it didn't exist.
Now here we're onto this term of exist once again, and I don't think these are things that exist. I think these are merely truths. They are things that we presuppose because they are truths.
A truth is a statement. A truth is a condition, a statement. It's a conceptualization of something. When it confuse truth with a fact, or confuse truth with a rock, we don't want to commit the fallacy of conflation. If you're already admitting.
My position is that, like if you remove all the minds in the universe, a rock is still what it is. And if you remove all the rocks from the universe, then a rock is still what it is, or it's actually not what it's not.
Well, if you removed all minds, period, there wouldn't be any truth by which you could make any statement, so it just doesn't work. But you did admit that the universe, that the laws of logic are not contingent upon the physical realm at all. That's good. I agree with you. So then what are they contingent upon, if not the physical realm?
Don't know. I'm not sure that they're contingent upon anything.
So you don't have an answer from your atheistic worldview.
Correct, which we established 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
But what you just asserted is that no atheistic worldview can give an account for these, and you tried to demonstrate this by showing that I don't have an account for that, which I'd already recognized and acknowledged.
Okay.
So where's your demonstration that's impossible for there to ever be an account for these? And then, if you were actually able to do that, you need to have a demonstration that it's possible that there could be an account for these.
Since the universe, you've negated as a possibility the source of the laws of logic. If the universe doesn't exist, we're talking about motion, matter, existence, 3 dimensions, whatever you want to call.
I'll go further. All reality, multiverse, cosmos, whatever you want to call it.
Gone. And you would still say that the laws of logic have their truth value.
Well, they're not assessed as true because there's no minds to do so, but what they point to would still be true.
Then you're being inconsistent, because you said that the laws of logic would be existing outside the universe if the universe didn't exist.
I've never said that they exist. I actually objected to the word existing because I think it is an incorrect term to apply to them.
The laws of logic don't have existence?
Not in any sense that we would use the word existence. Existence is necessarily a temporal concept. That's, something exists, it exists within the realm. When people say God exists outside of space and time, that's just absurd because it's using the word exist in a way that doesn't fit any normal usage.
God exists outside of time is absurd.
What does it mean to exist for 0 seconds?
I don't know.
Is it possible for something to exist for 0 seconds?
I don't know. I don't know all conditions about that and had studied that, so I wouldn't be able to say. I haven't thought through it. Wouldn't be a comment.
Wouldn't you think that in the normal usage of the word existence, if I said that I had $1 billion that existed in my bank for 0 seconds, for no time, not point something, but no time, that would be the equivalent of non-existence?
Yeah, the qualifier there is in the normal understanding I would agree. Since I don't know all possibilities, I wouldn't say absolutely yes or no. I'll plead ignorance. This is to say I have a lack of belief or assertion value on on the answer to that question.
Well, good. I won't take your admission of ignorance as an opportunity to extend that to all Christian worldviews and then therefore imply that I'm somehow correct.
Well, the atheistic worldview negates God's existence.
There is no the atheistic worldview,
yes,
and it's not a negation of God. It's not a negation of God's existence.
Yes, it is. It's functionally a negation. You argue against God's existence. You behave based on what you believe, not what you don't believe. You functionally.
No, that's not true either. That's
really.
Wow, that's
what do you do that's motivated out of what you don't believe in?
So you can take anything and look at it in terms of what you believe and don't believe. You could frame the question in terms of what you believe or you don't believe. Like, I don't believe it's right to own people. And then you could say, what you're really saying is that you believe that it's wrong to own people. So you could frame that either way. What I'm saying is, when you say the atheistic worldview, and it could be that I misunderstood what you were actually referring to at that time. I'm saying there's not, among atheists, there are a variety of worldviews. And even among atheists and atheism, it's not necessarily the assertion that there are no gods. It is the position of not believing that there are no gods. It is, I find God not guilty of existing. It's not that I find God innocent of existing.
Would you say that actions are based on beliefs or lack of beliefs?
Both, actually, but primarily we
Can you
tend
give me
to
an instance where an action is based on a lack of belief?
So we not exclusively. See, this is the thing.
Based on that would be exclusive.
Well, you're saying, you're implying that actions are based on a single belief, and I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that
I don't agree that. I would agree with you that we don't believe single things by themselves. Everything's connected to things. But for the example of what we're discussing, we behave based on what we believe, not what we don't believe.
Well, my belief of A and my lack of belief in C could both be contributing factors to the action that I take, correct?
I don't know. I don't know what your A and B and C are.
Well, for example, I don't believe that playing the lottery is a good idea.
So you believe it's a bad idea?
Yes, that's what I was talking about a minute ago. You can take any belief and respin it that way. And so in that sense, as I've said for probably the past 10 years now, we always act in accordance with our beliefs. But when you say that you never act on the basis of lack of belief, That is an oversimplification, because there are lacks of beliefs that contribute to the, like I don't know what my exact odds are for the lottery, and so you could say that I lack an understanding, perhaps.
So functionally, you operate as someone who believes there is no God, because you argue against God's existence. You're arguing based upon what you affirm, not what you don't affirm. People normally base their actions on what they believe, not what they don't believe. I know of no instance, not that there can't be some in existence, I know of no instance where someone does something motivated out of a complete lack of belief of something.
Well, you're asserting my motivations. You're saying that I act based on a belief that there is no God, and that's not the case. I act based on a belief that I have no good reason to believe that there's a God.
That's good enough for me. So functionally, which is why I used the word functionally, that you are functioning as though there is no God, and your behavior demonstrates what's in you, namely that you believe there is no God, because you argue constantly against God's existence.
So it's not that I argue constantly against God's existence. It is that I constantly point out fallacies from those who try to argue for God's existence. If someone had a valid and sound argument supported by evidence for the existence of God, then I would accept it and I would not be arguing against it. So,
now, what do you mean by supported by evidence? A valid argument supported by evidence. What do you mean?
Well, each claim is going to have a different standard of evidence that one would require in order to believe it.
What would be evidence for God's existence then?
I can't tell you what it would take to convince me that a God exists, because it would be arrogant and presumptive of me to claim that I can distinguish between a God presenting evidence for a God's existence and some massively powerful technological society claiming to be a God presenting evidence. But what I can say is that if there is a God, under most normative definitions, including I think the definition you would use, that God should know exactly what it would take to convince me and should be capable of doing that, and has not.
He's definitely chosen not to reveal himself to you, but you don't know what you would require in order to believe in God, and yet you want other people to provide what you don't know would require.
Well, I don't know what it would take to convince me. But that doesn't mean that I'm
parting of the sky, parting of the Red Sea, parting of an ocean. You're sitting there, and someone says the name of Jesus, and the ocean parts. You're going to believe in God now?
No.
Okay. What would it take then?
I just told you I don't know what it would take, but I can explain to you why that's not convincing. How did you demonstrate a causal link between, in the name of Jesus, part the sea, and the sea parting?
So you have to have a causal link for everything in order to have it be a proof?
Well, I need to have some reasonable expectation that I have determined the correct cause before I am justified in believing the cause, yes.
So you need a causal link with everything in order to believe it. That's what you're asserting here. You are asserting a justification, intellectual justification, connecting the dots, of having to have a causal explanation, a causal beginning to everything in order for you to believe it.
Except for the things that I've already acknowledged, I presuppose.
Right. That's why you're inconsistent.
It's not inconsistent.
Yes, it is.
To say that until someone shows me that there can be some explanation for this, I'm going to say I don't have an explanation. And so when somebody shows me the parting of the Red Sea, I'm not going to believe. My consistent position is I will not accept any claim in a causal sense until there is a demonstration that I should.
So what kind of evidence do you think would be manifested from a transcendent being?
I have no, well, I don't know.
Well, do you think a transcendental being would have transcendental properties?
Well, I think that would probably be by definition, but I don't know what a transcendental being is, or that it's possible for a transcendental being to exist. I mean,
well, you shouldn't say that you can or can't. You should be ignorant on that. You should be at least willing to entertain the possibility. Hypothetically speaking, if a transcendental being exists, maybe we could detect some transcendental properties.
Maybe we could, and as soon as someone demonstrates how we can detect and verify transcendental properties,
to detect and verify. So we're talking about verifying transcendentals, which transcend the very modus operandi, the very means of verification. I don't think
Are you saying that the transcendental can't be verified?
have to think about that. Can the transcendental be verified? The problem with the transcendental being verified would be that we'd be subjecting a transcendental to the non-transcendental, our verification. There's a problem in that, inherent there. I'm saying that I thought about this. I thought about this for a while. If God exists, let me back up here a little bit. I've talked to a lot of atheists, and they'll say, "Give me some evidence of God's existence: the parting of an ocean, a voice out of the sky, levitation of something." They're going to say no. Why? Because it's subjective. Because what they're doing, in my opinion, is making a huge mistake, requiring a physical form of evidence for a transcendental being. And if you have a presupposition that the universe is all there is, or God does not exist, you're working from that perspective, then no matter what you present, will never be able to fit into the criteria. So I was wondering, what would be a better approach? If you want a transcendental God to appear or to be discovered, you should look for transcendental qualities, transcendental attributes, things that have the characteristics of transcendentals.
So
that
is God transcendental? Is God transcendental?
Yeah, God transcends the universe in that He is not dependent upon it, and He's not restricted by space and time within it.
So can God manifest in reality in detectable ways?
Yeah, He did it in the person of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so wouldn't that mean that you could then verify?
Verify what? Because what color, for example, Matt, what color is humanity? Is it blue? How much does humanity or the human nature weigh? 3 pounds? It's a non sequitur question. How do we verify the existence of divinity? Well, look at my microscope and a camera and a blowtorch. We'll take it apart and we'll figure it out. We can't do that because it's the wrong criteria for the question, for the issue. If God
can manifest in reality in detectable ways, then we can at least verify those manifestations.
We could say, if the person of Jesus Christ, according to biblical theology, is called the hypostatic union, he has 2 distinct natures, divine and human. We can't even detect that he's human in nature except through the assumptions that we have that he walks and he talks and he has personhood, etc. How then will we verify his divinity? We couldn't. It would be the wrong category. It's a category mistake to say, look, let's verify God's existence, his transcendent divinity, by a physical means.
Sure. Then based on that, then there's no reason for anybody to believe it. And it's it's not because, as you mentioned a minute ago, that anybody's presupposing that the universe is all that exists. I'm not presupposing that the universe is all that exists. The universe is all that's been demonstrated to exist. If something else actually exists, and actually that may not be true, but if something exists beyond the universe in the transcendent sense that you're talking about, my position is I have no way of actually verifying that, and you seem to agree that I have no way of actually verifying that. And so my position is that one cannot be rationally justified in accepting it.
Transcendent manifestations would be things that would be unusual and that would transcend our universe and our time frame. For example, prophecy. For example, parting the Red Sea. For example, rising from the dead, performing miracles. These would be, or even we could say, the transcendent properties of the laws of logic.
So you'd have to have a way of distinguishing between that which is unusual and naturally caused, and that which is unusual and supernaturally caused.
And how are we going to do that?
Great question. I have no way of actually doing that, and yet I'm not the one who's pretending that what I believe is rationally justified until there's some way to distinguish between unusual things that are naturally caused and unusual things that are supernaturally caused, and until there's some demonstration of how to separate those two, then you cannot rationally point to an unusual thing and say this is a demonstration of the transcendent, because you are claiming at that point to be the little God detector that you don't think is possible.
Well, first of all, you shouldn't use the word pretending. I'm not pretending anything. I could say you're pretending to be a competent, intelligent person, and that would be an insult to you. I don't want to say anything like that, and you should not say I'm pretending to be some God detector, because it's a little condescending.
I am a little condescending on occasion, I freely admit, and what I'm not saying in any way that you're not serious and genuine. I'm just saying that you're serious and genuinely wrong about the reasoning.
I would say you're seriously and genuinely wrong about your reasoning about God.
I'm not the one who's asserting that I can tell the difference between two things that I just said I didn't have any mechanism to tell the difference between.
I didn't say that I could. I was running something by you to see what you would say, how you would react. Because the thing is that I'm saying is that you are painting yourself into a corner. You're painting yourself into a corner. You are defining things out of existence. Yes, you are.
I'm not. No, I have not defined anything out of existence. As a matter of fact, just a moment ago.
No. I'm not saying it that way.
What's that?
No, you misunderstood me, or I didn't speak right. I'm saying what you do, what you seem to be doing, at least from what I'm getting from you, is you're defining everything, or you are, let me say this, you're putting things in such a way that nothing can be known about God's existence. You say, how do we verify that he would actually exist? And I'm going to ask you, what would you mean by verify? What are you going to... Because, no, seriously, this is for you. It's subjectivism, what you're offering me.
No. That's not what I'm saying. First of all, is that I'm not saying that this proves that gods don't exist. I am in the position where I will believe this as soon as there's some way to demonstrate that it's true. My position is not, it's not my fault that the world is such that there's no way to tell the difference between unusual thing with natural cause and unusual thing with supernatural cause. That is the fault of a God if he exists. God, if he existed and created all of this and then created it in such a way that there's no way to distinguish between the two, is basically constructing a universe in which his existence is intentionally hidden. And it's not my fault in pointing out that we don't have a good reason to believe this. And my pointing out that I don't have a good reason to believe this is not in any way asserting that it is necessarily untrue.
Or the fault could be in the mind of the atheist who denies God and subjects God's existence to his own reasoning.
Sure.
His own subjectivity.
Sure.
So you could admit then that your whole criteria, your whole methodology here could be highly wrong, very subjective.
Sure.
What you're doing is you're painting yourself into a corner where you can't get out intellectually. Nothing can be verified. Nothing can be known. You don't know what's outside the universe. You don't have any way of accounting for the transcendental laws of logic, and you say you don't need to. You say, even when I posit something, you say, oh, it doesn't work. You dismiss everything I say, and then you say you don't have to defend anything. Why are you an atheist?
I love how you say that I've painted myself into a corner, and then as an example, I painted myself into a corner, and I don't know what's outside the universe. Do you?
Well, there is no outside the universe, I would say.
Well, then why did you
raise that? God himself is transcendent of the universe, and God is a necessary cause of the universe.
You just said that I painted myself into a corner, and one of the prime examples was that I don't know what's outside the universe, and I agree with you. I don't know what's outside the universe. Do you?
No, I don't know what's outside the universe.
So have you painted yourself into a corner where you don't know what's outside the universe?
Because I'm not the one saying that there's no way.
I did.
I'm not the one saying there's no way to verify God's existence.
Yes, you are, actually.
No, I'm not.
I talked to you about how to do this, and you said that, okay, I take that back. You did not say there was no way to do it. You said you were unaware of any way to do it.
Okay, now I'm lost in the conversation here because you're referring to something I'm not recalling. I was saying to you that the transcendent properties of God, at least theoretically, can be manifested in our physical realm, in our physical universe. I then said, for example, the transcendent properties of the laws of logic are evidence, or would be categorized as an evidence of God's existence. Also, I was saying the person and work of Jesus Christ. How are we going to detect and verify divinity? See, that's what I'm saying is you'd say, how do we detect divinity? Well, that's why I asked you, what color is it? How much does it weigh? You wouldn't be able to verify it.
You're the one who believes that this is divine. I don't. So what is your mechanism for detecting divinity?
Properties of divinity.
What does that mean?
Properties of anything. We don't sense the actual essence of something. We experience the properties of something. A rock has hardness and mass, so therefore it has weight, and it can hurt our hands. We can
measure and identify and agree on weight and mass. What is the measure for divinity, and how did you determine?
The properties of divinity will be measured in a different way than you would the properties of a rock.
Okay, you've said that 3 times. How do you do that?
So then what we would do, well, I'm not going to verify. You can't go out and verify. You don't verify it by looking out in the entire universe and saying, God's over there. I see now the string of existence that goes down into this planet, the Earth, and he did this thing. Now I can verify that it was him. No, what we do is
remotely like that. You're dodging this question.
I'm not dodging anything.
Yeah. Okay. Then you have asserted that Jesus was divine. That you believe that Jesus was divine.
According to the Word of God, yes.
Okay. How did you determine that Jesus was divine?
You sure you want to ask me that question?
Well, you went through this long thing just a minute ago saying, and if you roll it back, you can listen to where you said you can't determine that it's divine, but yet you believe that he's divine. So how do you determine that Jesus is divine?
I didn't determine
he existed.
I didn't determine it. You know, if I give you the answer, you're going to dismiss it. and that's just the way it is. But the truth is, he revealed himself to me when I was 17 years old. He came to me in person. No, I could not see him. No, I could not touch him. No, I could not. But I was aware of his presence. It's a subjective experience. I'm not offering it as proof of anything, okay? And
so why should anybody else believe it?
I'm not saying anybody else should believe it. That's a moral thought. I'm just saying, you asked me about my experience and why.
I understand that. Here's the thing, is that you're wanting to pretend. Well, I'm sorry, I'll take the pretend back. You have asserted that there's some problem with my worldview.
Yes, there is, absolutely.
And that there's not a problem with your worldview, and that you've just acknowledged that your acceptance of the divinity of Jesus comes from a personal revelation at the age of 17, and that this should not be justification for me. So, if I haven't had that personal revelation, how can I remotely be at fault? I mean, assuming that you have some special mechanism, I don't know how this revelation could possibly confirm divinity. I don't see any mechanism for that at all. But assuming that that happened for you, how can you fault someone for whom it has not happened?
I'm not faulting you for on the basis of my experience. I'm not faulting you for that. The Bible has declared that the knowledge of God is made known to everyone. You're just denying him. That's a theological issue, and we could argue Bible if you want.
I'm also denying Bigfoot and fairies and other things that don't have support.
Yeah, you certainly are. But they're not the cause of the not necessary preconditions for intelligibility either.
You haven't demonstrated that they're necessary.
I'm beginning to figure you out. I'm beginning to figure you out and how you think and what's behind your thoughts. All right? It seems to me that you want verification for things, but you want connecting the dots verification for all things. You want either an evidential type or a logically necessary thing.
Correct.
The problem with both is, if God is outside of our time-space realm, and he's transcendent, then we cannot have an evidential-based system for detecting him, because all that science and evidence is based on in the material realm is the material realm. So it's a category mistake to go that way. If you were to use the issue of logic and subject God to your reasonings, then you're subjecting him to your subjective ideas and your imperfect reasonings. No offense meant. But how are you going to be able to defend your reasoning as the right one to use when trying to find out whether or not God does or does not exist? You asked me earlier, what kind of evidence would we have? I was talking about the issue of transcendentals. From a Christian worldview, I can account for the laws of logic and the universality and their absoluteness and the regularity of nature, where you can't do that. I can't do that.
Me too.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can. Magical pixies have given me a personal revelation that account for logical absolutes in the primacy of reality.
Okay, so let me write this down. Matt Dillahunty affirms that he...
Somehow you're muted. I can't hear you.
You hear me? You hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Don't know what happened. So I'm writing this down. Matt Dillahunty affirms that he believes in magical pixies that what?
That are a necessary and sufficient account for the logical absolutes and the primacy of reality.
Okay. Of logical absolutes. Okay. Logical absolutes. Okay.
I don't know why you're bothering to type this up, because if you ever present it anywhere, you'll be made to look ridiculous, because it was clear to anybody who's watching this that I'm exposing the fact that anyone could claim that. It's a different thing to demonstrate it.
Okay.
And you haven't demonstrated your account.
What are magical pixies anyway? What are magical pixies?
I don't know. It's a mystery. Their mysterious nature is transcendent and cannot be accounted for by reasoning or the type of thinking we do in reality.
So the magical pixies are transcendent.
Oh, as far as I can tell, they are. They gave this revelation to me that proved that they are the one true gods of the universe.
They're the one true gods. That's a non sequitur.
Yes. It's not really a non sequitur. It may be disjunctive, but
one true gods.
Yeah.
So you're trying to actually relate God to magical pixies that are transparent.
Transcendent, not transparent.
You're right. Thank you. Transcendent. Transcendent magical pixies. It's always the case that the atheists bring up magic first. I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, because bits. So the reason that God can't be an explanation for anything is because we explain things in terms of other things that we understand. And by trying to use God as an explanation, you're just trying to solve a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery. You don't know how God serves as the foundation for reason. You just assert that he does. And when I asked Cy about this, So I said that God can do it because he's God. And then he tried to shift the burden of proof by saying, am I saying he's not? Now, it's not fair of me to saddle you with the crap that Sai says. But if it's similar, you know, it might not be two ducks, but it's a duck and a goose.
So God can't be the explanation for anything. So then God can't exist in your worldview.
No, that's not what I said at all.
You said, I wrote it down, God can't be an explanation for anything. That's exactly what you just said.
Yes. The God concept, the God assertions have no explanatory power because they don't explain anything. I did not say that this means that gods couldn't exist. I did not say that this means that God isn't in fact the cause or source behind things. I'm saying it has no explanatory power.
You said God can't be an explanation for anything. Have you examined all phenomena and know that God can't explain everything? Everything?
No, because I've examined the God concept. You see, if
what God concept?
A variety of God concepts. Clearly, the one that you're representing as well. It doesn't have explanatory power because it doesn't explain anything.
It doesn't have explanatory power. So if I were to say that God, the transcendent being, is behind the transcendent laws of logic, because the laws of logic are conceptual abstractions, they are abstract entities. You should know that if you study philosophy. And since abstractions are minds, are conceptual things, to say that God is behind them or God is the necessary precondition isn't an explanation?
No.
Okay. So I give you an explanation, but you just define it as not being an explanation.
How did you explain anything? How did it help me understand them? Or
I don't know how it can help you understand. That's up to you.
That's what an explanation is, Matt. It's something that helps you understand more. Simply saying that X is the cause of Y isn't an explanation.
You are the one who wants causal explanations. You said that earlier. If God is a necessary precondition for the laws of logic, then I'm giving you an explanation for why they can be justified and why we can trust them in their universality.
Yeah, it's not an explanation, and you haven't demonstrated both necessary and sufficient. What does it explain?
Necessary sufficient conditions deal with the physical realm.
Oh,
how
so
do you
you're
do necessary sufficient with the logical truth?
So now you're engaged in the fallacy of special pleading, where when it comes to the logical absolutes, you're going to throw that out and say that causality only applies within the natural world.
I think you're special pleading. Why are you saying that that I can't use God as an explanation of things, but you can use, well, why are you saying I can't use God as an explanation of things? Why is that special pleading?
You couldn't use it. I said it doesn't actually explain anything. The fact that you are asserting X is caused by Y doesn't mean that Y is an explanation, because Y may not add any information to help us understand either X or the cause of X.
All right. So the resurrection of Jesus.
If I tell a kid, I just showed a magic trick to a kid, and if I tell them that I palmed the card, and they don't know what palming is, I haven't explained a thing.
Okay. So the Christian God is the omnipresent, omnipotent being who is the creator of the universe. He is absolute in his thinking and pure in his mind. He is a necessary precondition for intelligibility, and when you presuppose that God exists, then you can believe in the regularity and uniformity of nature. And the problem of induction basically goes away from the Christian perspective. It doesn't go away from the atheist perspective. From the Christian perspective, we can give account for absolute morals, which I'm hoping you do believe in some moral absolutes. From the Christian perspective, we can account for the universality of the laws of logic, which you've admitted you can't do. So to say that the Christian God is not an explanation for anything is just a denial that, yes, I have used him as a necessary precondition, because, again, by the impossibility of the contrary, we have God, we have not God.
You haven't demonstrated.
What does it mean to demonstrate? What do you want me to do? Is get a lever with a string on it and say, see, this is how God does it. Let me show you how his hand works, and that's how the universality of the laws of logic work? You haven't made any point by that.
You haven't demonstrated the impossibility of the contrary. You've just asserted it over and over and over again. And then when I bring this point up, you want me to demonstrate that some other worldview can.
The issue with the impossibility of the contrary is that the atheist perspective cannot account for the transcendental laws of logic.
Prove it.
Okay. We have the physical universe or we don't have the physical universe. If God exists, he's not part of the physical universe. This is why earlier I was saying to you about the issue of the laws of logic, the universe did not exist. You said, yes, if they did not exist, then the laws of logic are still valid and still true. That means they're not properties of the physical realm. That means your naturalism goes away, which you said you affirm earlier.
No,
so if you're natural, yes, you did.
No, we were very clear on naturalism, and remember this hemming and hawing about whether or not, and you're kind of like, I'm kind of a presuppositionalist and kind of not, and I said that, you know, that we were bros on that. Do you remember that? And that was a reference to the naturalism thing. The idea that if the world goes away, suddenly naturalism goes away, I don't accept, because naturalism is in contrast with supernaturalism.
If the world goes away, there's nothing natural to be. There's nothing in the universe that exists. Naturalism goes away.
Which doesn't. So now you're talking about a nothing. Okay. I'm not saying that that nothing is unnatural.
How do you have laws of logic in a nothingness? Because you were saying that laws of logic are not dependent upon the physical realm. If the physical realm goes away, you said they're still valid. That's what you said. So how do you account for that? How do you justify that?
When I'm talking about naturalism, I'm not just talking about our local presentation of the universe. Whether it turns out the multiverse is correct, or if you wipe
all of that.
If you get rid of all of that, that doesn't mean that what's left is unnatural.
If there's nothing that exists, we can't have anything that's natural.
It doesn't mean that there's anything that we currently identify as natural left. That doesn't mean that what is left, which would be nothingness, is unnatural. It's now this is the problem of nothing. But what you just said a minute ago is that if you presuppose God, you now have an account for all of these things that you listed.
Yes, you do.
Okay. What justification is there to presuppose God? Because when to me, I have given you the list of things that I'm willing to presuppose, and one of the key things is that when we do those presuppositions, we should not have too many of them unnecessarily. We should not multiply entities. And by multiplying entities, you could look at that as going a step further. If you're uncomfortable with not having an account for the logical absolutes, that doesn't mean that you're justified in presupposing what you view as an explanation for them. And it doesn't mean that your proposed explanation, whether it's an explanation or not, is actually true.
Well, it can't be true to you. It can't be. We've already talked about your subjectivity. We cannot have, or you cannot allow, in your worldview, any explanation I could present for the existence of God to be true.
That's not true. If you could actually, okay, no, it's not. Yes, it is. No, we're going to do that for the next 5 minutes.
Okay, let's do it. Ready?
You could actually demonstrate. Okay, so if God revealed Himself to me the way you did, the way He did to you,
yeah.
Would I then have a sound justification for believing that God exists?
You wouldn't have any choice but to believe He exists.
Great. Now, absent that, do I have a sound justification to believe that God exists?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Now, you've just acknowledged that with or without that revelation, it's possible for me to have a sound justification that God exists. And not a minute ago, you said that it was impossible for me to have that justification.
Different perspectives and different senses. From your perspective, you don't. From my perspective, yes, because you were asking me from my perspective, so you just switched. My perspective is, yes, if God revealed Himself to you, you would have certain justification. And as you were saying, you have justification without special revelation like that? Yes, you do, because Romans 1, 18 through 31 talks about that. But then you were talking about a different sense of validation from your perspective. No, because you, as an atheist, now, I'm not trying to be offensive when I say you, as an atheist, aren't allowed to think like this.
I'm ready for it, because you're getting ready to mischaracterize my position for about the third time, so please say it.
Well, then you're wow. Well, maybe it's difficult to actually characterize your position because you keep shifting around so much. First you say you're a naturalist, then you say you're not a naturalist. Then you say the laws of logic exist without the universe, but then you talk about there's a multiverse, then there's not a multiverse. The laws of logic, which are conceptual, are not dependent upon the physical realm. But then I ask, how are they going to be there? You don't know. You just come back to, you don't know. It's all up to me to prove everything, but yet there's no way to prove anything with you because it's all subjective to you.
No, actually, it's not just all subjective to me in the sense that you're using the word. You keep asserting things like, I presuppose the universe is all that exists. That's simply not true.
Tell me exactly what you believe about the universe. Is it all that exists or not?
I don't know whether the universe is all that exists or not.
Are the laws of logic absolute or not?
I presuppose that they are absolute.
Okay. Do you presuppose God exists or does not exist?
Neither.
Okay, so you lack belief. That's what you would go with, right?
I'm not presupposing either.
Okay. You lack belief, right? You don't assume or anything. But all of your arguments are against Him.
It's different. I didn't say that I lacked belief. I have belief positions, but they're not presuppositions. They are tentative conclusions.
So about God, what would you say?
Which God?
I'm only arguing for the Christian God.
Okay, I'm just. So the last time we did this, and you said something about God, I assumed that we were talking about the Christian God, and then you
talking about the Christian God.
Then you went off on, do you know that for all gods type thing.
Okay, I'm only arguing in favor of the Christian God.
Okay, well, if you listened back a while ago, maybe I misheard you, whatever.
Okay, but I'm only arguing for the Christian God.
I do not believe. Well, see, that's first of all, there's not just one Christian God. There's a whole bunch of ideas from different Christian groups about what the Christian God is or isn't.
Really? Name two.
Name two.
Name two, because you're implying they're contradictory. Name two.
Okay, let me clarify this a slightly different way. It's my understanding that different Christian denominations have disagreements about nearly every aspect of Christendom. I mean, when they were going through the biblical canon, they removed the people who thought that. So there are some who say that Jesus was all man, some who say that Jesus was all divine, some who said that he was both, some who say that he was neither, that he existed on some spiritual plane. These exist in different realms for people who identify as Christian. There are people like the caller who called into the show today does not think that God is omnipotent or omniscient. He identifies as a Christian. He disagrees with the definition that you just gave a little bit ago.
Well, have him call my show, and then he and I can work that out.
But can we at least agree that Christians don't agree on the God concept? Or people identifying as Christians don't agree on the God concept?
No, we can't agree. I can't see that as a true statement because the implication is that you're implying all. Let me explain why. You're implying that all Christians always disagree in all aspects of the God idea.
No, what I'm saying is that there are people identify as Christians, who have different God concepts. They have different concepts in their mind of God.
Like the Mormons and the Christians. Yeah, the Mormons are not. This isn't a debate on Mormonism and Christianity because it's an in-house debate. But I wanted you to understand that there are certain realms within Christian theology in the Bible, and I'm quite qualified to discuss who and what God is biblically versus other religious systems. When you talk about denominational difference.
And I'm not.
No, you're not. I'm
not. 25 years as a Southern Baptist, studying to be a preacher. I'm not qualified to comment on Christianity.
Oh, I didn't know you were 25 years and studying to be a preacher. I apologize. I had no idea. Seriously, I didn't know. So let me test you then. Let's see what you do know, okay?
I'm not interested in that right now.
Oh, okay. So I want to test to see if you really know what Christianity is, because when I hear you say things like this, it tells me you don't.
You know, true Christian fallacy.
I know what the Bible says about Jesus Christ, for example. I know what it says about him. If someone says that God...
As do I, Matt, and my point was...
No, you don't.
This was very simple. I said there are people who... I made it as easy for you as possible. There are people who identify as Christian who have different God concepts. That is simply a fact. And it's a fact because...
You are absolutely correct. People do...
Then why didn't you say that a second ago when I asked this very clearly?
Because you're not understanding that there is a true issue of what Christian is.
I don't care what you think a true Christian is.
You don't?
No, it doesn't matter because somebody else has a different definition of what a true Christian is, and until the two of you provide a mechanism by which I can determine which is a true Christian, then you're on the same footing.
Okay, is the Bible good enough for you?
Probably.
It's what we Christians claim is our source document?
Sure, but there's this matter of interpretation and a matter of potential contradictions. The church has debated all sorts of things over the course of history, not to mention the fact that there are, like the John and comma and other things that are, were kind of added there to support this idea of a Trinity. Because
comma Johannium, 1 John 5:7. It's called the comma Johannium, right?
It's also called the Johannium comma.
Okay.
But, I'm not going to measure biblical penises with you right now because we're actually talking about something separate. And you have said that, I presuppose the universe is all that exists when that's not the case. And you have said that God can't be subjected to reasoning or evidence, and yet you have some justification and have acknowledged that I could have some justification. I want to know what the mechanism is.
You jump all over the place pretty quickly. As far as the Christian thing goes, if you want to have a discussion on what true Christianity is, I'm quite qualified to be able to discuss that. I've been studying this since 1980. I do know what it is. It's what I do. That's another topic if you're ever interested in seriously. So that
I got 8 years on you then, because
so that you don't misrepresent Christianity again, because you've done it a couple of times. No disrespect meant, but you have. You've misrepresented the issue of denominational differences. The denominational differences are in adiaphora. Do you know what adiaphora is?
No.
Okay. You know what a hypostatic union is?
No.
Communicati idiomatum. The difference between justification, imputation, sanctification?
No.
Starting to be a preacher. Okay. These are the basics of the Christian faith. All right. Let's get back into the issue of
for me, the basis of my Christian faith was the Bible,
which says that Jesus Christ is God in flesh. There's only one God in all existence, in all place, and all time. Mormons say there's many gods, many places, many times. You can become gods if you have secret handshakes, secret underwear. Obviously,
yes, and when I was a Christian, I would have agreed that Mormons weren't Christians and that Catholics were following false doctrine.
Good for you.
And all kinds of things. My foundation was the Bible. But
good for you.
One of the things that I recognize is that there are different interpretations of the Bible. For example, look at Westboro Baptist Church. Now, my parents may agree with them on their positions, but they don't agree with them on their tactics. I wonder why it is that the people who don't agree with them on their positions or tactics still get labeled Christians and don't tend to object to them in public.
Well, I don't agree with them, period.
You don't agree that homosexuality is an abomination?
Oh, it is an abomination. I don't agree with them in their tactics. I thought that's what you're talking about.
Oh, so you agree with their positions but not their tactics?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've written against them and their tactics. All right. Now, back to the topic at hand. The atheistic worldview, as I've said, I have not heard any atheist over the many, many years give any explanation for the validity of their atheism or being able to account for the transcendent nature of the laws of logic. This is, we've been talking about this.
I've seen are white.
I'm sorry?
That's the no black swan fallacy.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. I understand. There are only certain possibilities. There's only a certain amount of possibilities that we can offer. We either have, they're based on the physical universe or they're not based on the physical universe. And we can negate one at a time. And obviously the laws of logic are not based upon the physical universe. They're not properties of the physical universe because they're abstractions.
They're not, to the extent that they have no meaning or power without the concept, without the recognition that they're true. These things might still be true in the absence of everything.
But to say that means they're conventions. You see, they're given power by our agreement or our belief in it. Is simply to say the laws of logic come into existence and have power based upon our mental assent to them, and that's
the concepts do. The conceptualizing of these truths do, but the truths themselves don't. The
truths themselves are independent of our minds.
Well, yes, just like a rock is independent of my mind, and I have a concept of a rock.
Good, you're a good idealist, at least in that sense. So you agree then that the laws of logic are not dependent or properties of the physical universe, and are not dependent upon our minds, are they?
So they become meaningless outside of that, just like a rock.
I don't say that. I don't agree with that.
What's that?
I don't agree with that. They become meaningless. We're not talking about meaningless. We're talking about the accounting for them, how they have their support. They're not properties of the physical universe. They're not dependent upon individual minds, right?
Not dependent upon individual minds, correct.
You already admitted that earlier.
Yes, I'm wow. Am I not allowed a second to make sure that I don't say the wrong thing?
Of course you are. We all do that, no problem. Go ahead.
Like you've been doing for 5 years with the Dillahunty fallacy that's not a fallacy.
Go ahead now. So you agree then that the laws of logic are not dependent upon individual human minds?
About 5 times now.
Okay, good. Thank you. So then they're not dependent upon human minds. They're not dependent upon the physical universe, yet we use them and we appeal to them. That means they exist outside of ourselves, since we appeal to them and not dependent upon our minds, right?
So when you say appeal to them, see, my thing is that I presuppose that these things are true, and I view it as kind of like a practical necessity.
Okay, so you appeal to them, you use them, you assume their validity. I do too, but
Yeah.
they're not dependent on the universe, not dependent on our physical minds, and they're conceptual. They are called abstract entities. In philosophy, the laws of logic are called abstract entities. Abstract the mind. So
Just like
we have
quantity flow.
abstract. I just heard repeat. Sorry, heard an echo. We have abstract entities that are not dependent upon the physical realm or our minds. These abstractions are conceptual. That's what an abstraction is.
No, I'm rejecting that they are conceptual, just like I did 5 years ago. The fact that they can be conceived does not mean that they are conceptual, that their ontology is conceptual.
But your thought, you have a thought, right? I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Are you hearing an echo?
I'm not getting an echo. I'm not getting an echo.
1, 2, 3. It just went on and off again. Sorry, very distracting. Sorry, you don't hear it? I don't hear it.
Nope.
It's gone. Okay.
Maybe it was Jesus.
If it were. There it is. You hear it?
No.
Bible thumping, are we having is there an issue? Because I'm hearing my sentences being repeated back to me. Now it's stopped.
I do hear it sometimes.
Sometimes coming and going?
Do you have another window open?
You guys hear that I don't. Imagine that.
Well, we do hear from the voice of God sometimes.
Clear.
And if I did, well, then that'd be really cool.
It would be. I pray for you. Yes,
I think I appreciate both of you guys and the tone that this is maintained fairly well. You know, from a Christian's perspective, Matt Dillahunty lacks belief and doesn't know what it would take to convince him. And even if there was a miracle, he wouldn't believe. And I think that is consistent with Scripture. That and you know, Matt Slick, you shared how God revealed at your conversion. You had a sense of Jesus' presence. All of us who have been converted, regenerated, have something similar to that. And you know, we believers who are watching Matt Dillahunty, you know, articulate his position. What can we do?
Well, one of the things you just said, you know, if there was a miracle, I wouldn't believe it. And my question is, what justification do you have to call it a miracle? Because to my mind, and you know, this is where Matt was talking about unusual things with natural causes and unusual things with supernatural causes. In order to identify that it was in fact a miracle, you would need to demonstrate a causal link, or
that's a problem.
Yeah, it is, and that's why
earlier I raised, for example, the resurrection of Jesus after 3 days.
Well, first of all, I don't have any reason to believe that that happened at all, let alone
eyewitness accounts.
What's that?
Eyewitness accounts.
We don't have eyewitness accounts.
Sure we do.
And even if we did, eyewitness testimony is not reliable. You could
there's no way to demonstrate it to you.
Yeah, I don't see any way, given the current information that people have presented, to demonstrate that this was true. That doesn't mean there's no way, because you believe in a God who should be able to clearly demonstrate to me that this is true. And what I find curious is that there are people that you can go talk to right now who will relay their UFO abduction story. We don't tend to believe them. I don't. Some people, I suppose, do. And these are real living, breathing people that will relay an account. Their accounts are often very similar. They're eyewitnesses, their first experiences, and we don't believe them. And yet somehow you take, you remove yourself a couple thousand years from the events, and you have anonymous texts written by we don't know who, reporting on things that have no external justification. There's serious question as to whether or not Jesus was a historical figure or not. I'm not saying that he wasn't. I'm just talking about, this is not the way. If I were God, first of all, I wouldn't have gone any about this in any of the ways that it's purported. But if I had done this and I had an important message for everybody, and I had put people in a world where they used their brain, where gullibility was a problem, where verification of evidence and causal links was the reliable method to correctly understanding reality, There's no way I would relay my message in languages that die out, in purported eyewitness testimony. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, not just ordinary evidence. And the equivalent of telling me you have a pet dog is, or telling me you have a pet dog is not the equivalent of telling me you have a pet invisible pixie or a pet dragon, as Sagan pointed out. So I know what the Bible says happened. I'm asking, what reason do I think that the Bible is an accurate representation of what happened? And if in fact those events took place, what reason do we have to think that the best explanation for those events is that there's a God and this was his plan?
I don't believe it's an issue of proof and evidence with you. I believe that it's an issue of what's going to satisfy your subjectivity. And nothing's going to satisfy your subjectivity, no matter what I might offer, whether it be the universality, the transcendent nature, the logical laws.
And we should just stop this, because if you're going to keep pretending that nothing could convince me when I've just told you I don't know what would convince me, but I'm open. And I've offered an explanation. I said, given this story, you wanted to point to the Bible and the resurrection of Jesus, and I'm asking for what reason do I have for that account to be true?
Well,
if your answer is that nothing could convince me, then we should just stop talking, because I don't know what would convince me, but if there's a God would know. And it's not my fault that the account is not something that anyone should rationally accept at face value. That's
Matt,
not a failure of my worldview.
a lot of
Hey, Matt, can I ask? Let me ask, because Matt Dillahunty said that a few times. Matt Dillahunty, if a being appeared to you claiming to be Jesus Christ in a glorified body, and you were able to see that, you know, there were consistent scars in this body of this being who claims to be Jesus Christ appearing to you, and he raised some people from the dead right in front of you, people that you knew were dead, would that convince you?
Would it convince me of what?
That Jesus Christ is God.
No, because that's not the conclusion. Now, would I believe that it happened, provided I had, you know, independent verification that, you know, I would do whatever I would normally do in some situation like that. But that's not in and of itself proof of all the other claims. If somebody said, hey, I can raise people from the dead, and then they demonstrated that they could raise people from the dead, I would believe they raised people from the dead. But that's a separate issue from their other claims as well.
So even if we could convince you that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, that wouldn't be enough evidence for you that he's the creator of all things, and that, you know, people go to heaven and hell and all this other teachings of Scripture. Even if we were able to prove it to you, to your satisfaction.
No, but let's be serious for a second. Nothing remotely like the sort of evidence that you're hypothesizing occurs. None of us get that. None of us get anything remotely like that.
Man,
I'm not.
I am being serious, man. I'm just sincerely talking to you as a human being.
Why would you come up with a hypothetical? Do you have some reason to think that it's likely that any evidence of that sort is going to be presented?
I came up with that scenario because you claimed that to understand your position. Not just to understand your position. Your position is you don't know what would convince you, so I put forward that scenario. Well, would that convince you?
Well,
That's
it would convince me of what I saw and what was actually verifiable. So it's kind of like saying, you know, as a magician, somebody who's been doing magic my entire life, if I made a bunch of claims about the powers and the abilities that I have, and magicians are famous for extending claims about what they can actually do. I mean, that's part of the mystique. And then I did a trick that you thought was impossible. Would you believe that I could then also raise people from the dead, if that was my other claim?
No.
Okay, so if I could then raise people from the dead, would you then believe that I was God?
Actually, no, I wouldn't.
Okay, so then you have no objection in my position, because merely demonstrating that somebody can raise somebody from the dead doesn't in and of itself prove that they're God. I mean, you hold the same position I do.
What we do is we make judgments based upon phenomena, how we interpret things. It always comes down to what our assumptions are. When I was an agnostic atheist, the Lord came to me and he convinced me. I'm not offering that as proof. I'm just saying that sometimes it takes something very unusual to occur. I used to be mixed up in the occult. I used to carry in high school a thorium fuel book for extra reading, and I enjoyed it. You see, Matt, what I'm seeing is a great deal of subjectivism from you. You're telling me that you don't even know what would convince you. Now, you're not arguing with God, you're arguing with me. I'm certainly not God. I'm not the best representative by any means.
Can I ask why is that objectionable? Because isn't it arrogant to say that you do know, that you would be able to tell the difference between a God and, let's say, incredibly advanced aliens?
No, I don't think it's arrogant. Not when he reveals himself to you.
But that's him. That's my point.
But I'd like to finish my observation. You know, and you can tell if I'm way off base. But
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just think you're so subjective, and please understand, I'm not trying to attack you. I really am not. I just think your position is one of such indefensibility that I think what you've done, and I'm not going to say this because it's going to sound too much like a personal attack, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to do that. I just think your position is subjective, and that since you don't even know what would satisfy your requirements for God's existence, you seem to want to, in my opinion, put the shift the burden of proof upon others. You want everybody. You want everybody else. You talk to me. You talk to Cy. You talk to other Christians. You want the Christians to satisfy what can't be satisfied in you.
No.
I don't believe that you have any way of being able to verify, connect the dots. If we offer the resurrection, not going to work. Jesus wasn't even real. Parting of a sea, no, that can't work either. No matter what postulates, whatever I offer you, you say, no, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. Well, then how are we going to get through? How is it even possible to have any?
That's not my problem, and it's not your problem. I'm not shifting it onto you. The responsibility is on the shoulders of God. However, if you're going to assert that you have and that other people can have a reasonable justified belief in a God, then you have adopted a burden of proof. I'm sorry that
I've already been demonstrating that. The universality of the laws of logic, I can account for them from my worldview. You say I can't, and I don't accept that your statement and your assertion is valid. I can propose an option that you can't. I don't believe that you are able. I do not believe.
As an example of why yours is unsatisfactory, because you haven't demonstrated that it's true, and you haven't demonstrated it's necessary.
To you.
Correct. To me. I'm the guy here that you're trying to convince.
Right.
Each one of us is the ultimate determiner of what's reasonable or not. Now, the whole point in us having this conversation is so that the people sitting out there can determine which one of us has the most reasonable position. And my position is I'm not going to believe anything until there is sufficient evidence for it within the framework of reality. I'm already acknowledging the presupposition of logical absolutes and everything else. And the examples that you provide, I have not only been eminently reasonable in talking about, this parting the Red Sea. What does the parting the Red Sea prove? Well, it proves the Red Sea parted. It does not prove that the cause was God.
What's the best explanation for the parting of the Red Sea? By a man who claims to have been with God, raises his hands in the name of God, and it occurs. What would be the best explanation?
Great. That is the perfect question, and I covered this in a video that I did recently. In order to determine what is the best explanation, we have to be able to calculate the probability of any particular explanation.
How do you know that's true?
I'm not playing this game with you.
No, I'm serious. You make a statement that you assert that this is the criteria we have to go by. How do you know that probability calculations is the right way to do that? How do you know that?
Probability calculations, what we're talking about is, you specifically said, what's the best answer?
Well, do you love your wife and your wife loves you? Do you have calculation statistics for that?
Okay, is it the fact that I'm going to actually get to something of substance that you're just going to try to derail this with the how do you know? Because I don't want to play.
I'm only doing what you've been doing. Each time I brought something up, you've tried to derail it yourself. I'm now doing that to you, and I'll admit I'm trying to derail it because I think what you're doing is presupposing something you can't validate as being true, that you're going to say that statistic analysis is how you have to do it?
I'm not presupposing a thing.
How do you know?
You asked what the best explanation was and how we go about determining it, and I'm giving you a model by which we consistently. I'm giving you a model by which we consistently go about determining what the best explanation is.
What's your model?
And that is, you take all of the explanations and you calculate how likely they are to occur. Correct?
Okay.
Are we in agreement that far?
I'm agreeing or disagreeing. I'm listening.
Okay. If something occurs and you want to demonstrate what the cause of it was, you have to investigate and find out how many times this resulted because of this and how many times this resulted because of something else. And if one of them happens more often, they're both causes, they're both identified causes. If one of them happens more often, then that is the most probable explanation, excluding all the other things that you're going to consider. I mean, things get complex. If you roll a die, there's options of 1 to 6. We know what the odds are. When it comes to God as a possible explanation, we have no demonstration that a God is possible or likely, and we have no confirmed accounts of that God actually causing something. What we have are proposed accounts of that God causing something. So when we get to something like the origin of the universe, first of all, we have no other universes to compare it to. This is a single occurrence. And when we talk about what's the most probable explanation for the universe.
Parting of the Red Sea, we should stick with that.
Okay. Well, that, as far as I know, that is also a single occurrence.
So would that be the definition of a miracle?
I don't know what you're going to identify as a miracle. What I'm saying is that there's
parting of the Red Sea.
What we asked was, what was the most probable explanation for the parting of the Red Sea?
I'd say God. I don't think that fish are going to do it. I don't think whales are going to do it. I don't think an earthquake's going to do it.
Yeah, that's you're back to the argument from ignorance again.
It's not an argument from ignorance. God's the best explanation for it.
It's not an explanation. You have no indication that it's possible that a God exists or can or would part the Red Sea.
What do you mean, no? You said earlier, no demonstration that a God is possible or even likely. You're making an awfully grandiose statement. No demonstration. You know all demonstrations.
Sorry?
You know all occurrences and all evidences and all demonstrations.
No, I'm talking about my experience.
So back to subjectivity again. So the parting of the Red Sea.
Were you at the parting of the Red Sea?
No, I wasn't.
Do you even know that it happened?
I believe it happened.
Okay, but how confident are you that it actually happened?
Pretty confident.
And you are convinced that God is the best explanation for the parting of the Red Sea?
Yes.
What if it turns out the Red Sea didn't even part?
Well, then there wouldn't be an explanation necessary if it didn't occur.
Okay, so then you'd be wrong on both counts.
Yes.
What if it turns out that the description of it was exaggerated, and it was that there was a natural explanation or some other explanation that you're unaware of?
And how are you going to verify that historically?
How did you determine that God is the most probable explanation for this thing which may or may not have happened?
Because if it's a miracle, it's recorded in the Bible, which I have no reason to doubt, then I can believe that it occurred. I do believe that it occurred, then it fits a definition of miracle. It's within my worldview. It's fine.
How did you determine that it's a miracle? I mean, isn't that question
because it's the parting of the Red Sea is a pretty good miracle. Don't you think that would be a miracle? Look, you and I are on a ocean liner, and we're arguing about this, and we see the ocean just part down to the. Would you say, I've seen that before 50 times?
No. But the fact that I haven't seen something, so what I'm saying is that a miracle is question begging, because you are already asserting by defining it as a miracle that the explanation must be God or supernatural.
There's just no way to ever show you or prove any evidence for God's existence. Even the parting of the Red Sea, even the resurrection of Jesus, it just can't be allowed, can it? You're going to find one way or another to say, did you verify it? Were you there? Did you see it? Of course not, of course not, of course not. Because these are historical events. How do you verify historical events? You know as well as I do, you don't.
Yeah, and yet you seem to believe that not only is the account accurate, but that you have a causal explanation for it.
Yes, absolutely. I've studied the reliability of the Bible.
That is a perfectly reasonable explanation.
Yes, it is. If God exists, it's perfectly reasonable.
Well, yeah, if God exists, anything could be reasonable. But you don't get to just assume that and then say it's reasonable.
But you make assumptions, I make assumptions, and if we have evidence and we have to make the least amount of assumptions to explain something, then no problem. The parting of the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea, for example, if I presuppose God did it, it works. Whether or not it's true is a different issue we can talk about, but it certainly works.
And if I presuppose that sea parting pixies did it, it works.
There you go. You like pixies, man. I'm going to send you a shirt with pixies on it because that's what you seem to like.
Okay. We have definitely come to another. What's that? What's that, Matt?
We've hit the time. It's been 2 hours. My wife's waiting for me anyway.
Yeah. I want to thank you for coming on, Matt. It's been.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Matt Dillahunty. Thanks for coming on, Mr. Dillahunty.
Yeah, let's have another meeting.
Chat, who was trying to say that I needed to look up question begging because I do it when I assume the laws of logic. No, question begging is when you assume the explanation for something, and with the laws of logic, I'm not assuming any. I presuppose them. As a matter of fact, as I clearly stated several times, I'm not convinced that a why they exist is even a cogent question. So I'm not begging the question because I'm not offering an explanation for him. So Mr. Fortinet or whatever.
Well, I believe that the reason you have to say you're not even concerned why they exist is because in your worldview you can't account for them. That's what I would assume.
No, I'm not. I didn't say I wasn't concerned with why. I said I'm not convinced that why is a cogent question. It may or may not be. And when somebody gives a demonstration that there is a why that we can discover and would be benefit from, then all of a sudden it becomes cogent.
Back to the subjectivity again.
Well, hey, was the Dillahunty a fallacy or not?
Depends on how it's defined.
We're done. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Take care, Matt. Didn't you redefine it to the Dillahunty dodging?
Yeah. Yeah. The Dillahunty dodge. Excuse me. Out of that. Hold on. I'm going to clear my throat. Put myself on mute.
It's like you were chasing a greased pig there, Matt.
Sheesh. I got a bunch of notes. I was trying, at the beginning, to figure out what this guy's position is. It didn't become evident until later on. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. What he's good at is clever phrases talking about what he doesn't know about. It might be this, could be that, could be that. It's up to you to demonstrate, in my subjectivity, what is the truth. I mean, it's impossible. He paints himself into a corner. You can't argue with somebody like that because there's nothing to argue about.
Yeah.
All right, and that's the thing is he said, I don't have a position to defend. Well, then what are you doing here?
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
So
he is the ultimate skeptic. He's skeptic about everything.
Whew.
But it was good to have him on, though. We don't want to talk. We've got no reason to talk bad about him. He was a very good gentleman.
Yeah,
it was nice to have him on.
It was a very good conversation. I think that, especially compared to the Aaron Ra conversation, I thought it was at least productive and cordial.
Yeah.
Matt Dillahunty's no idiot. Clearly, he's just wrong about this particular topic.
Well, you see, I've noticed something with the atheists. The transcendental argument, believe it or not, is a very good argument. And you'll notice that what he was doing was, he's very good at dodging, very, very good in my opinion. But what he was doing, I forgot my point of thought. I just saw something go through my mind. Dang it. It happens. I forgot what I was going to say. Forgot about that.
Well, I started to say, he lacks belief, and he doesn't know anything that could convince him. And there's no way to prove the supernatural to him. There's no, even if a miracle was to occur, that's not going to convince him.
Right.
It's consistent with Scripture. People suppress the truth. Matt's suppressed it to a point where I wonder if he knows it all. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
he presupposes.
the only thing that's going to convince him is the Holy Spirit.
That's it.
But is that different from anyone else?
No. He just he's being raised up by the enemy to sound intellectual, and he was begging the question left and right. He was presupposing things, and then presupposing that you got to basically prove everything. So if I say God's a necessary explanation, it can't be. Laws of logic conceptual, he doesn't agree. His technique seems to be just to disagree with everything and then say, now you prove it to me. That seems to be how he works. It took me till about a half hour ago to finally figure that out. That's what he does. He's not offering real rational thought, in my opinion. What he's offering is reasons anything else that is stated can't be true, and what he falls back on is you have to prove it, you have to demonstrate it. And he presupposes the idea of, this is why I asked him several times, he didn't know what to do with it, the necessary and sufficient conditions deals with physical things, not transcendentals. And that threw him off a little bit, and he wasn't able to deal with that, but I got him figured out what he does. So that is what he does. Anyway, he doesn't have answers for everything. He's kind of an agnostic in a lot of stuff. He wants everybody else to prove everything, and then all he does is listen and then finds ways to attack whatever anybody might say is anything. That's all it is with him. He doesn't offer anything to replace anything, and that's his weakness. He doesn't have a position that he's defending. He just attacks everybody else's position, and yet he calls himself an atheist. So his worldview is one of subjectivism, but it really is not subjectivism, because what he's doing is he's assuming his own position of subjectivism is the criteria and the means by which he has to know things and come to know things. And it's not, I don't want to say the word fair, but it's not rational to require of others to get through his subjective wall, because all he's got to do is move it around whichever direction he wants to move it. So, make sense?
Yep. Yeah, it does. Did you watch all? You didn't watch all the debate with Seitan Bruggencate?
No, about a half hour-ish, I think, a little bit more. Why?
Matt made it clear that he doesn't know anything. He just believes. He doesn't classify things as I know anything. He just has strong beliefs.
Right.
Well, he's a man of great faith.
Yeah, he is. And the fact that he so many times tried to skirt the issue of the transcendental laws of logic, every time we got to that or started approaching that, in different directions I tried with him, he always would just block it and try some way to avoid it. And what he would do is just go off onto, not a rant, but he'd go off onto just a series of statements about whatever it would be. You know, this issue, for example, when I was trying to one thing at a time, work through, I knew where I'm going with it. I think he knew where I was going to go with it, and he tried to derail it. And this is what he was doing. For example, the laws of logic, they're not dependent upon the physical realm, he admitted. They're not dependent upon our minds, he admitted. When we talked about them being abstract entities, which is what philosophers call them, and abstractions are by definition of the mind, that's where he knew he was had, and this is why he had to stop at that point and say no, he wouldn't agree with the abstraction issue. But to not agree with the abstraction issue is ridiculous, because there's nothing left that I'm even aware of to label them, particularly when he acknowledges that they're called abstract entities. But how do you have abstractions without minds? It doesn't make any sense. The logical implication is there's an abstract mind behind these logical absolutes. And this is the next step, and he would never allow the conversation to get to that place, because he would be pinned at that point. I believe he would be pinned. I'm just trying to be fair. I believe he would say, no, he wouldn't be pinned. I'm just going to benefit of the doubt for him. But that's the problem. This is why the atheistic worldview is problematic. It cannot account for these things. It cannot account for the universality of the transcendental laws. They're not dependent upon the physical realm. They're not dependent upon human minds. Yet they have actuality because people appeal to them outside of themselves. So therefore, how do you account for them? That's the toe stubber for the atheist. And that's a toe stubber for him as well.
Matt.
Yes.
The tactic he was using was, if you give it any validity, it was undefeatable. He doesn't have to concede anything.
Right.
To be true, because there could be another explanation that we just don't know of. He doesn't have to agree that anything is true.
Right.
And doesn't have to give any explanation to it. I mean, how would that work for a Christian in a debate?
Right. You could sum up.
Well, it wouldn't work for anybody in a debate because you're not proving anything. You're just saying we don't know anything. Right. We actually don't know anything.
Right. See, what he's doing is he doesn't have a position except for presuppositions, which are based on subjectivity.
Right.
That's Matt Dillahunty. No position, just presuppositions based on subjectivity. And why? Because I'd love to continue to talk to him and say, now, why are these presuppositions the right ones? And he wouldn't be able to answer. Just because. Because he just has to. Why? At least as a Christian, I could say, because God is behind them, as I did say before. God is behind them. God is authoring these laws. He is a transcendent precondition for the transcendent abstractions we call the laws of logic. That is an explanation. His denial of it as an explanation doesn't work. He made the same mistake that Gordon Stein made in the debate with Greg Bahnsen. Because Stein wanted to have Greg Bahnsen say how God does it, connect those dots. But you don't have to have an explanation of how to know that something works. I don't have to know how an engine works in order to know that it does work. And it's not just to say that I have an appeal to ignorance, which is what he would like to say, but I think he was appealing to ignorance left and right, because he doesn't know, he doesn't know, he doesn't know. He's hiding behind ignorance. I'm at least saying, no, there's a transcendent being. How he communicates his transcendence, I don't know. But there's another problem, because how could we verify transcendence in a non-transcendent realm? He's asking the impossible. What we have to do is by analogy and by the best possible explanation is to simply say that the transcendent being is a necessary precondition to the transcendent abstract entities we call the laws of logic. That is the best explanation. There is none in an atheistic worldview without an abstract transcendent mind. That's the whole point. And he did not invalidate that argument. In fact, if anything, he helped demonstrate it was still true.
Well, there could be another explanation we just don't know.
The Dillahunty dodge, I'll call it that.
Hey, it was very nice having him on. He was a gentleman. It was his request to come on, and it was a good discussion. So we had quite a few viewers. We had, I think, almost 430 at one time. So if anybody else would like to come on, Bible Thumping Wingnut Hangout, you can contact me just like Matt Dillahunty did, and we'll try to get something happening. I think it's about time to wrap it up, though, because it's getting pretty late here.
I do want to debate him, though. I do want to have a formal debate. I do.
He did. He was open to that. And,
yes.
And for the record, I did ask him if he would come on and talk to Seitan Bruggencate, and he said he would not. So he's holding to his previous statements after the debate that Sai and Matt Dillahunty had. So that's all for tonight. Stay tuned to this channel. We'll be doing more Google Hangouts and debates and having Matt Slick on. And thanks for watching. Thank you, Matt Slick. And thank you
for having me.
Thank you, Matthew 4:19. You are a blessing in disguise.
All right.